So it is my great pleasure and honor to bring to the stage Daniel and Gabor Maté.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody in here and out there. This is neat. This is our first live streamed event. Just to give you a little sense of how tonight is going to go. Some of you are here for how many are here for the full weekend workshop? I should have asked who isn't. My goodness. Okay, great. Most of you. That's awesome. So we'll be seeing you throughout the weekend, I should say. What tonight is an introduction to the topic. And so we're not going to be getting too in-depth. This is our favored format. We've done this every time, which is on the Friday night. Each of us gets up here and speaks in, gives a barely prepared set of remarks. And the other one doesn't know what each one's going to say. We haven't run this by each other. So I'll talk for about 15, 20 minutes, then he will do the same. And then we will sit in those two chairs and we'll have a talk. And we'll see what happens. And then we will take questions from all of you, most importantly, I think. So I want to start with the best joke I've heard in a long time, or read, I should say. This is by an American comedian named Ariel Elias, who was recently in the news because she had to duck a beer chucked at her by some right-wing comedy fan. She writes, "I honestly have a lot of sympathy for Kanye. We both unfairly blame the Jews when we're having a mental health crisis. It's just that for me, it's more specifically geared towards my parents." And it's funny because it's true, as Homer Simpson said. Now, speaking of grudges and reflexive blaming of parents, I mean, my dad and I write in The Myth of Normal about how parent blaming is unscientific, and it's unhelpful, and it's cruel. And that doesn't mean that I haven't indulged in it from time to time. And if you watch any of the previous talks I've given on YouTube on these events, there can sometimes be a subtle thread of not quite parent blaming, but I have to say a sort of parent exposing. There's a part of me that's always taken a certain delight in having the opportunity, finally, for the first time in my life, to have an audience for this relationship that's been so intense and weird and complicated and consequential for me. And if you'd told me when I was 9 years old that someday, imagine we're sitting around the dinner table having one of our Maté dinners, and you told me, "Daniel, one day there's going to be bleachers around the table and people will be able to look in and see," I would have been like, "Thank God." It's like, am I the only one who's seeing this? No. So I had to get that out of my system. And then still sometimes when I'm up here, it can happen that something will slip out that has a kind of edge to it, where I'm kind of, digging. And some people dig that, and some people take offense at that, and some people just shake their heads. And my parents have varying reactions to it. But tonight, I actually want to try to talk about responsibility, specifically mine, because that's the only responsibility that matters worth a damn, because I have nothing to do with his responsibility. We say in this workshop that relationships, if you want them to work, that is, they're not 50-50. They're 100-100, which means in practice, they're 100, period. Because the other 100 is none of your business. Now, that's really hard to do in practice. And I think it's useful to look at, to try and wonder a little bit about responsibility, rather than clinging to some inherited definition. I think with a lot of these, for those of us in like the seeking world, the New Age, or psychological, or spiritual, or self-help worlds, are you sending emails?
No, it's okay. Go on.
Well, yeah, it's okay, but are you sending emails?
No, I had to send something.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to know if you're sending emails.
It was an emergency. But
Got it.
Yeah.
Anyway, where was I? Responsibility. When we reify, which is to say we set in stone any definition of any of these big concepts, like whether it's responsibility or truth or freedom, or even newfangled concepts like boundaries, the minute we set them in stone, it's a recipe for mischief because they can too easily become dogma or an attitude or an affect or a performance or a pose, or just kind of superficial and static. They're not dynamic. They can't actually respond to the situations that arise. And a lot of us have heard this kind of helpful mnemonic play on words, right? Responsible means response-able. Able to respond, which is a good definition, or it's a good concept because it's the opposite of trauma in a sense, right? Trauma inhibits or it limits response flexibility. We get locked into certain responses, so if we're response able, it means we're more flexible. I want to look beyond that, and if we actually look at the etymology of the word, it means accountable for one's actions and answerable to another for an act performed or its consequences. And actually it shares the same root as the word sponsor, from the Latin spondere, to pledge. So there's a kind of accountability, and accountability is actually a financial term. There's an obligation, there's a kind of owing of something. But the question is, to whom or to what are we responsible? What does it mean to be responsible? Too many of us, when we hear the word responsible, we hear burden, we hear blame, we hear duty, we hear fault. And I've been looking for a way of looking at responsibility in my relationship with my parents that actually empowers me, that actually frees me up, that doesn't make me feel shitty. Like, why not? So it means uncoupling some of the old definitions that I've had and trying to see what it feels like. Never mind what the definition is or what the concept is up here in my head, but what is the world of responsibility? What does it taste like? When I'm being responsible, what does it feel like? And when I'm not being responsible, what does it feel like? And I've had 4 occasions in the past 2 months, at least 4, with my parents to practice this. And they're all cases where I, in some way or other, crossed a line. Or you could say screwed up, or you could say made a scene. But they were breakdowns in the relationship. They were disruptions or eruptions. And I want to just tell you briefly about each because each of them involved a different... I had to improvise what responsibility meant to me in each moment. And it looked different in each case. So the backdrop was Myth of Normal was just about to come out. And I wasn't looking forward to it. I was kind of dreading it. Now, I have to say that since it's come out, it's been amazing. It's been a total joy. I'm really excited to see him on like the world's biggest podcasts and getting the recognition that he's always deserved from, much bigger audience than he's ever had. I believe in the material. And I've been getting a bit of a platform. People have been inviting me on podcasts. I find that I have things to say. I'm really enjoying it. But leading up to it, I had a really rough summer. I had just been through a breakup, a terrible heartbreak, one of the worst I've ever had. My musical theater work had dried up since the spring. So I was basically just sitting there through the summer, not doing anything except waiting for this book on which my father's name is the bigger font. Not knowing what kind of attention, if any, I'm going to get. Not really being invited to take part in most of the book tour. I did record the audiobook. If you like, if the sound of this doesn't set your teeth on edge, you can purchase that. But I was feeling insecure about my performance. And my body was starting to flare up. I was having both mental and physical stress symptoms towards the end of the summer. And right around this time, I came home to Vancouver to stay in my parents' home. First for a family bar mitzvah at the end of August, and then finally for the book launch. And this is when things started to go kind of askew. Now, the first incident happened one night when I had stayed home from a family event because, like I said, I was having some physical symptoms. One of them was a really bad infection, and I was in a lot of pain. And I was killing the pain with THC gummies because that was the only thing that worked, and because I enjoyed it. And that night I decided to, top off the THC gummies with a little THC smoking. And my folks got home, and I sat around the table with them, and I was feeling kind of vulnerable and kind of, like I'm sick, and it was nice. We were hanging out. And then at a certain point, I wanted to share something with my dad. I wanted to share with him a thought I had had. Now, I have thoughts when I'm high. Oh, do I ever have thoughts? I love my thoughts when I'm high. They're juicy and delicious, and they're so true and exciting and vivid and crucial that I express them right now. And it was about hello again, actually. It was so exciting. It was about hello again. It was some new distinction, some new thing I'd realized that we need to put in the book, in the workshop. And my dad didn't respond the way I was hoping he would. And in the ensuing 15 minutes, we had an exchange that got kind of nasty. At least it felt nasty to me. And he said some things that really hurt my feelings. And at a certain point, he got mad at me. He said, I don't like your energy right now. And I slammed the door, walked out the door down to the park. I'm furious. And I stood there in the park, and I'm high. The high is definitely, the buzz had been killed, but I'm still under the effect. And I could feel all the different competing voices in my head. I could hear them, blaming him, bitter, resentful, blaming myself, feeling guilty and, like a terrible son. And I did this thing I don't think I've ever done in one of these situations, because these things have happened before. I'm not proud of it. I'm 47 years old. Haven't quite cracked the code of how to not have these things happen. But I think that makes me human. We'll find out this weekend. I said to myself, I'm not going home until I'm clear. That's what I'm going to take responsibility for at this moment, because that's all I can take responsibility for. I can't control the thoughts in my head. I can't control what happened. I can't change the fact that I was, any of it. So I took my shoes off, stood in the grass under the summer stars, and I just tried to ground myself, and I tried to let everything kind of flow out of me. And all of the competing stories of who was to blame and this and that and what it all meant. And then finally, I got down to the very nut of it, the simplest version that made me feel the most clear. It's like, oh, I broke our agreement. Because my dad and I, for over 20 years, have an agreement that when I'm high, we don't interact. Because he doesn't like it. He just doesn't like it. Now, I used to take that really personally. That means you don't like me. Because some part of me comes out that you don't like. Well, maybe. But we've made an agreement. And what I realized is there's no moral judgment of me. It just doesn't work. Why would we continue to do something that never works? Do I have to talk to him when I'm high? Could I not write it down and talk to him the next day? So I realized that the whole thing had ensued from that slip-up. And in that moment, all the things he said that hurt my feelings, I just disqualified. I was just like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, actually. Yeah, they hurt my feelings. And I can remember what the triggers were and take a look at why those things triggered me, but I don't need to go to him with it. We don't need to sort anything out. It's very simple. Dad, I went home, I walked right in. Before I went to bed, I said, Dad, that was entirely me. I'm really sorry. That was it. And I think he was a little surprised and pleased, and he thanked me, and that was it. So that's what taking responsibility looked like in that situation. What's the simplest version of this? And I went to bed feeling really good. I didn't feel guilty at all. I was like, oh, yeah. I broke an agreement. It's not right or wrong. It just doesn't work. The next incident was a lot nastier. And it was an incident where I perceived that he was invading my privacy. And I was sure I was right. I was doing a therapy appointment on the main floor. Again, I'm still staying in their house. By the end of the trip, I realized I don't have to stay in their house. I can go stay with my uncle and aunt. They have a guest room. That's what being responsible looked like by the end of the trip. I don't have to live with these people. I'm not trapped in this house like I used to be. It's not a diss of them. It's like, what works? Again, I'm visiting Vancouver. I'm an adult. But in this case, he came down right at the tail end of my therapy appointment. He didn't realize I was still in the therapy appointment. But the sound of his footsteps coming down the stairs at a certain volume and a certain pace triggered my nervous system because they reminded me of times when that was a harbinger of bad things. I could feel it in my body. It was like an electric shock. And my therapist saw it, and he kind of winced, and he said, "Oh, that's really tough." And then we said goodbye. And I'm sitting there with the discomfort, and without thinking, I open my laptop, I go to Gmail, I open a new message, and I start typing. I've done this my entire life. Not Gmail, handwritten letters at age 6, very long ones slipped under their door. Have to explain myself to them, have to protest. Drawing dinosaurs, 2 big dinosaurs yelling at a little dinosaur. Caption, "Is this the proper way to treat a child?" They kept it. They're so proud of that one. This is who my parents are. They're the kind of parents who keep that.
It's going to be in the book.
It's going to be in the book, yeah. Yeah, it's a good drawing, actually. Where was I?
You were telling about the incident that I came down the stairs.
Right. So,
And you wrote a letter.
right, I'm writing this email, right?
Yeah.
And I always say it's going to be very concise, very powerful, to the point. And 16 paragraphs later, my finger is hovering on the trackpad above the send button. Should I do it? Should I send it? I probably shouldn't. You know what? I got it out of my system. That's fine. Fuck it. I send it. And I get a rush of, something. And the next minute, I'm like, ugh, I don't know. And this time, my dad wasn't having it. And he was about to fly to Austin to do the Joe Rogan podcast. He'd been doing 4 interviews a day for weeks. And he just wrote me back. He's like, "Daniel, this is garbage. I'm not dealing with this. I'm not dealing with your drama right now." And I was incensed. I was channeling Dave Chappelle there. I was incensed. Because, he's not hearing me, and this is just like... So I left. I left, and I walked down to Kitts Beach, which is the beach in Vancouver. And I walked home, and all day I was stewing and still taking my THC gummies for the pain. And I couldn't let go of it until my brother got home that night. And we went for a walk together, and he said, "Daniel, is it just possible that you're carrying some body memory here of some kind of violation of your privacy, and that's not actually happening right now, and that Dad didn't mean at all to invade your privacy, and he probably couldn't hear that you were still on the call, and that he's a 78-year-old guy who's really tired and busy, and he was just going to get his shoes from the front door?" And I was like, well, maybe. And that's all I could actually muster at that point. I couldn't quite let go of it. So what responsibility looked like in that moment was writing to my dad and saying, "Dad, I'm starting to think that maybe I got this one wrong. And if that's the case, I really regret how I handled it. And I'm just kind of still chewing on it, but I want you to know, I think I put a lot more onus on you than I would have liked to, and I'm sorry." I didn't have to overdo it or "I'm so sorry, Father, please forgive me." No, it's just, here's where I'm at. I'm shifting. It's not easy. I don't want to let go of this one, but I'm letting go of it. 2 more brief stories, and then I'll be done. One was in New York. We were doing an event together, and I had agreed for some reason to moderate an event where my father was the featured guest. It was a book launch. We had done a book launch a few days earlier in Vancouver. We were the 2 featured guests, and there was a 3rd moderator. Now, I'm in the role of moderating him. And we never really discussed what that meant. If you think about it, that's a little strange. Usually a moderator moderates something, a discussion. So I found myself on stage in a kind of an interviewer role, and I resented it, actually. I was like, this is a demotion. I'm your co-author. And just some stuff happened. Now, I believed to my bones at the time that he was to blame. My entire family, mom, brother, sister, who are not given to letting him off the hook when he's being a jerk, said to me, "Daniel, nope, this time it was all you." You were the antagonist. That's what it looked like. And again, I sat with that one for a while. And I was caught between these two competing versions. And I ended up settling on, you know what? I'm responsible for this. I didn't want to do this before it started. I said yes to it, and then I didn't take responsibility for specifying how this is going to go. I was the moderator. I did not take responsibility for the event, and I let something take over me. It didn't change how I saw it at the time, and it didn't mean that my mom and brother and sister were right and that I was wrong. It didn't mean that I was right and they were wrong. It just meant that I realized that our relationship, whether it's professional or personal, happens under certain conditions. And if we don't set the conditions up right, there are guaranteed habits that are going to come out. And that was a case where I didn't manage the conditions properly. And we'll be talking about that, the environment of the relationship. The very last one actually has to do with my mom, and I'm glad that Carol mentioned my mom, because I have often kind of left her out of this, and she has asked me when she gets to be a part of Hello Again. And she should be, because this is not a workshop about fathers and sons. At that book launch in Vancouver, I said something that stung her. It was mostly a very lovely event. And given the amount of stress I'd been under, I think I handled myself very well. But I said something to one of the participants about how sometimes I'm allergic to my parents physically. And I was alluding to all the physical symptoms I'd been having. And she thought that was really harsh. And she was visiting Brooklyn at this time, and we went to the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, and we ended up lying in the grass together, just lying, looking at the clouds. She invited me to do that. At first I was like, no, Mom, I don't want to do that. That's goofy. But I was like, I always resist her. I'm always saying no to her invitations to be warm and sweet and vulnerable. So I went and lay down with her, and then I said, Mom, I want to talk about this. And where the conversation ended up was, I said, Mom, you know Dad's attachment versus authenticity dilemma does anyone know what I'm talking about? People heard him talk about this? That's the essential dilemma for a child. I said, I really am not up there to hurt you guys, and I know that sometimes covertly I have been. I've been trying to be cathartic by exposing things about you in front of people, and I'm sorry. I really don't want to do that. But I want to tell you, I need you to give me a little grace here. I'm requesting it. Because I'm trying to do something very tricky. I'm trying to walk a certain line. I'm trying to have both the authenticity and the attachment. I'm doing this work with Dad about parent-adult-child relationships. I'm working through what my childhood was like for me. I'm speaking to the experience of an adult child. There are adult children in the room. Sometimes people need to hear that even a Maté has had real visceral difficulties with their parents. And I said, it's like I'm trying to learn to ride a bike. On the one hand, I want to honor you, stay in relationship with you, love you, be true to the family. On the other hand, I'm also an artist. I'm a risk taker. I'm a self-expresser. And sometimes when I'm learning to ride this bike, I might tilt too far to either side. I said, can you accept that? Can you grant me that? And to my real surprise and delight, she said, yes, I can actually. I really actually get that. Now, in the past, I would have been very defensive. But this time, responsibility meant owning that I did something that hurt my mother's feelings, thinking about what is my true intention, thinking, is there a request I need to make? Is there something I need to ask for? And finding the words to ask for it. And that was an entirely new conversation. We'd never had that conversation before, and it's been beautiful between us ever since. So that's really what I want to wish for all of you this weekend and tonight. Not some fantasy reconciliation, not some Hollywood script, some outcome that's pre-written, but just, wouldn't it be nice if you could have a new kind of conversation? Just say something or hear something that you've never heard before from this person. And if you're not in relationship with this person, if you're estranged, or if they're deceased, or demented, or otherwise incapable of receiving, wouldn't it be nice to have a different experience with the them in your head? A new experience. And that's why we call this Hello Again, a fresh start for parents and their adult children. So may we all have that, and please come, get what you came for. That's what I wish for you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gabor.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations, because any other time me sending that email in the middle of your talk would have set off fireworks, I think. So I don't know how you
I'd be
did.
sitting here writing my response email.
It was from somebody quite desperate that I had to respond to.
Got it.
So again, welcome here, and it's very good to be back at Omega, and it's good to be working with Daniel again. We've done this workshop now a number of times since 2016, and this is the first time live that we're doing it for quite a few years. It's always a different experience because our relationship is at a different place, and we've learned a few more things, and maybe forgotten a few things as well, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
But still, it's quite a dilemma, this relationship, or potentially quite a dilemma, this relationship between adult, child, and parent, because you really begin from a position, first of all, when a child is born. I mean, I said this, I think, at our first workshop, is literally one of the identifiable, most happy moments of my life, most transcendently joyful moments of my life, was when this little guy, when he was a really little guy, came out from the womb, and he had blue feet and blue hands and scrumpled up little face, and I just started crying with joy, and I never thought I'd experienced such great happiness. And then, so you have this great love, you know, and not only that, you're all powerful. I mean, you pick him up, you put him down, you feed him, you know, you look after him. You just know everything what's good for him, and you do your best to answer what you think is best for him. And you know, you really do know better than he does. I mean, you know that he mustn't crawl outside into the winter snow with no clothes on. I mean, you know that. You know better. He doesn't know that. I know that. So then how do we get from this position of just pure love and joy at the arrival to the rancor and the misery that can happen later on? And how do we let go from this idea that we actually know better? Because at some point we did know better. And it's hard to let go of roles, you know. And part of the problem is that we tend to look upon parenting as a role. And as soon as we look upon it as a role, that comes with certain rules and expectations and fantasies. And we identify with the role. Now, identify is an interesting word. It comes from two Latin words. One is idem, which means the same, and facere, to make. So to identify is to make yourself the same as. So as soon as I identify with myself, with my role as a parent, then I kind of disappear as a person. I'm the role. And this other person is also not seen as a person, but they're seen as the child. And that imposes certain expectations of myself and certain expectations on the child. So one of the things that's most difficult for parents of adult kids is to let go of the role. Because we've been that role for so long, we've identified with it so powerfully, and so many times we have to step up to fulfill the expectations of that role. Then how do we end up letting go of it to create an entirely new relationship? And the parent also knows a lot of things that the child doesn't know and shouldn't know. Now, Daniel will never recall the sleepless nights when he was coughing and he had a fever, and I would stay by his bedside the whole night and go to work next morning. Nor should he know it, because it's not like he owes me anything as a result. That's just what we do as parents, isn't it? Any parent of any species will extend themselves to take care of the needs of the young one. But even though he shouldn't know it, and it's not his job to know it, and it's not fair of us to impose that on him, you know, when he's acting in ways that I'm not happy with, or or that maybe hurt my feelings, and I trot out my sufferings and my sacrifices, and you don't realize what I did for you, you know. Well, it's hard not to do that, because at a certain point you want some recompense, you want some gratitude, you want some recognition. And in moments when that's not forthcoming, that gets very upsetting, especially if you identify with the role. So how to let go of that? And it turns out that parenting actually is not a role at all. And that's why step parents have such a hard time, because they think they can step into a role. And the child doesn't necessarily accept that. But it's also true of non-step parents, is that when we step into a role, that's not what the child wants from us. They don't want us in a role. They want us in a relationship. So ultimately, parenting is not a role at all. It's a relationship. And it's in the nature of relationships that they're dynamic. It has to do with relating to the other person. This is certainly true of adult relationships, spousal relationships, where if people are playing roles according to certain accepted definitions and requisites of the role, the relationship can very soon dry up and become very unsatisfactory for one or both partners. For a relationship to work, and by the way, in the introduction, you heard that my wife and I have been married nearly 50 years. Yeah, nearly 53 years actually, next week. And it's a relationship that it's relating to the other person that's there. So it's relating to a person, not to another role. And you're not the role, you're a person relating to somebody else. And that means it's by definition dynamic. And if the adult child, or if the parent-child relationship is dynamic, it means it has to evolve. And as soon as we rigidly identify with the role, the evolution stops. So we have to be comfortable enough and loose enough and grounded enough to allow that relationship to evolve, to grow. And that means that over the years, it becomes very different than what it was in the beginning. The love is still there, but what's the difference? The difference is that this all-powerful, all-knowing aspect that is necessarily present in the beginning has to erode and devolve and become something else entirely. And at some point, the challenge is that two people who are both adults can relate to each other like persons and seeing the personhood of the other. And it's so difficult to do that because we're so programmed to identify with the past. And there's so many hurts and troubles and disturbed dynamics that it's difficult through the screen of all those troubles to see the other person as a person. So Daniel mentioned this incident in New York that actually happened about a month ago, I would think. Maybe a month and a half ago, yeah. In New York at one of our book launches, and he mentioned his own role in that. But I tell you what happened to me is we were on stage, and all of a sudden I perceived myself as being attacked by my son. And I became kind of tense and defensive. And when I get tense and defensive, I have a certain default setting. And my default setting is, I'm out of here. You know, they call that avoidant attachment style. So in my marriage, I mean, that's the pattern, is that, you know, if I get upset, disappointed, or you know, perceive that my needs aren't being respected, I'm with the wrong person. You think after 53 years of marriage, I'd learned that no, I'm not with the wrong person? If I am, why am I still here, you know? but in the moment, my default dynamic is I'm out of here, you know. So with Daniel, literally, Daniel doesn't know this, but to my daughter and to my wife, after this incident happened, I was livid. I was saying, that's it, I'm not working with this guy again. Hell with the book tour. We just written the book together. A week later, it was on the New York Times bestsellers list. It still is. But my response was, that's it, I'm not working with it again. Omega, hell with Omega. Hello again, a fresh start. Hell with hello again, and fresh start. The book, heck with the book, you know. Now, I'm not saying that I was in my rational mind when I was saying all that. I'm talking about my own default setting, which is like a withdrawal reaction. And what I didn't see when I'm in that state myself was I wasn't capable of seeing, is that my son on stage was just having a moment of stress and confusion and pain. And if I had seen that, I would have reacted very differently. Now, I don't hold myself responsible for the pain and confusion that he was experiencing at that moment. I didn't cause it. So it's not like I was guilty of anything. But if I'd just seen it, so, you know, it's not that I should take it personally and somehow try and rescue him from it. But if I'd seen him for the person he was at that moment, he wasn't anybody intent on attacking his father. He was just somebody at that moment in confusion and pain. And I could have supported him just by the tone of my voice, just by not being defensive myself, just by taking care of myself, by taking responsibility for my own personal reactions. And I think as Daniel and I are both moving towards saying here, excuse me, and I'll have to excuse for my recurrent cough. This is the 7th week of this interminable book tour now, and I've been literally in Europe and North America and several events a day, and so my voice is carrying the brunt of that, and sometimes you'll hear me coughing. I'm not infectious, you don't have to worry about it. It has to do simply with talking too much. But we're moving towards the sense that the more responsibility we can take for our own reactions at any given moment, the more ground there is for seeing the other person for who they really are at that moment. That's not a moral imperative. Nobody should do it. But if you can do it, to the extent that we can do it, we actually can avoid or work through so much difficulty. So one theme of this weekend is taking responsibility. And again, of course, it's a difficult dynamic because as parents, for all the love that we had for our kids, most of us, in significant ways, also hurt our kids. We didn't, thank you, we didn't mean to hurt them, but we did. One of my children, when they were 9-year-old, came to me and said, "Dad, I wish your mom would get a divorce." And I said, "Oh, well, why do you say that?" She said, and they said, "I don't know, but I think my life would be better." And you know, they were 100% right. Because given the tensions between my wife and I, the atmosphere for our kids was a very difficult one. And Daniel, in our book, The Myth of Normal, writes about, he used to have this recurrent nightmare that the floor would disappear from under his feet. And what that was about is as loving and playful and joyful as our family atmosphere could be at times, the kids never knew when there'd be a storm that would arrive all of a sudden because of the unresolved traumas and reactivity of both my wife Ray and I. And then the floor, which is the emotional safety that children need, would disappear from beneath their feet. Now, we didn't mean to do that. I loved my children endlessly and infinitely. I remember that this deep oceanic love swelling in my heart when they were asleep. And There's nothing like standing over a sleeping child and just feeling this infinite, universal, world-filling love, And then in the morning when it's time for breakfast, it's a different story. But despite that deep love that we have, we end up hurting them. And we end up hurting them largely because for two reasons. One is that we don't realize what their needs actually are. We don't know what our kids' needs are. We have our own ideas of what we want for them or from them, but we don't have the education in this culture to know what children's real needs are, so we're not there to meet them. And secondly, we all carry the wounds of our own childhood. There was a study with rats, but they looked at how mother rats groomed. It's called grooming. Actually, it means mother rats lick their babies on the perineal area, and that's called grooming. And they do that within a few hours of birth. And some mothers do that in a more loving, caring fashion than other rat mothers. And their offspring grow up to have better brains for resisting stress as adults than the infants of rats who don't groom as well. And those rats who were groomed well by their mothers, when they become mothers themselves, they also groom their babies more lovingly. It's not a genetic trait though, because if you take the infants of mothers who don't groom well and put them with ones who do, they grow up to be mothers who groom their kids really well as well. So it's simply the impact of early parenting that's lodged in the brain. And so we all carry that stuff that we didn't get from our parents into our parenting. Like one thing I didn't do very well, my brothers are quite astonishing when I watch them playing with little kids. They're just spontaneous and fun and just inventive, and the kids just lap it up. They do it. Strange kids in I've seen them in a playground just engaging with other little kids, and right away they're in their world. I never knew how to play with little kids. I didn't know how to play with my own little kids. I kept waiting for them to. I was always very stiff when I played with my kids, and I waited for them. I was thinking, wait till they learn how to speak, then I'll be able to interact with them. But that's putting the cart before the horse, because the brain's play system, we have a system in our brains for play, that gets engaged very early in life, and it's necessary for healthy brain development. What happened was, I wasn't played with when I was an infant. Under the circumstances of my first year of life, my mother was in no mood to play, and my father wasn't even there. Hence, I carried that into my parenting. So my playfulness came later, and it was less spontaneous, perhaps. So what I'm saying is that despite this great love that we have for our children, and our children never know how infinite that love is until perhaps they become parents themselves. But I remember something my poor mother used to say to me when I was 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years old. Wait till you have kids, then you'll find out how difficult it is, In a certain sense, she was right. In another sense, she was blaming me for her own difficulties. So despite this great love that we have, we do end up hurting our kids, and then we have to deal with the impact of that hurt later on in life. And sometimes our kids then act out their pain in certain ways, and then we get triggered, and now we have two people who are both hurt, engaged with each other in a not very particularly helpful way. So our task this weekend is to somehow help you and for Daniel and I to continue our process of what? Of getting into the present, where we're not suffering under the tyranny of the past, but we actually can see the other person in the present. Now we may choose to engage with them, we may choose not to engage with them. So we have no agenda here that there should be beautiful reconciliations and as Daniel said, Hollywood-like happy endings. But it is our intention that you should see the other person clearly, so that you can decide consciously if and how you want to engage with them. Paul Simon has this song, I forget, is it the Mother and Child Reunion? Where he sings, the mother-child reunion is only a motion away. Well, you can make that the parent-child reunion, only a motion away. And I think somewhere else in the song he sings, only a moment away. It's true. It's possible. Now, what does reunion mean, though? Reunion means that there was a union once. There was a unity once. Maybe very early. And somehow that unity got broken, and it's possible to recreate it. It's possible to have a reunion. Reunion doesn't mean that we go back to the same dynamic as existed at the time of the original union. In this case, it means that two people, each responsible for themselves, actually make a decision, if they wish, to reconnect. And if they wish not to reconnect, that they make that without resentment or rancor, but as free people. So our intention this weekend, we hope to deliver on it, is to help everybody here become as free as possible to make whichever choice you need to make. Thank you.
By the way, I told Mom and Hannah the same thing after that talk. I'm not working with them anymore. I was counting on them seeing it my way. It turned out very differently.
They did, but they didn't.
They didn't, no, not at all. So, yeah, we're going to chew the fat for a few minutes about what each other said or just see what comes up, and then we're going to throw it over to you guys.
Yeah, so can I start asking a question?
You may.
Yeah. So I meant it when I said that, when I sent that email. Any other time, I would have expected you to really have a very strong negative and hurt and even hostile reaction. Mm-hmm. But you didn't. You made a comment, but you didn't throw you off your game.
Yeah.
What's happened for you?
How did he do that?
How did he do that?
Yeah, thanks for noticing. I don't know if I would have erupted on stage, but I would have been a lot snarkier.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. I would have tried to win a point, like you guys see. Well, the cumulative effect. See, if catastrophes are for anything, they're for exposing what is bankrupt and out of date. And all of those catastrophes that I talked about, and all those incidents were very upsetting for me, like deeply upsetting in different ways. They really shook me up. Some of them reminded me of some of my least favorite moments from childhood that I'd completely forgotten. Some of them made me feel ashamed and falling short of a version of myself that I'd like to be. Some of them sparked empathy for you or Mom, where I was like, oh, I don't want to make them feel that way. Just regret. And I just set an intention to juice all the juice of learning out of those incidents, because I actually don't want them to happen again. Right. So I've actually it seems that I've set an intention that, but it comes down to, you and I set an intention. See, unlike the event in New York where we didn't set any intention, we didn't talk about how we wanted this to go, we didn't talk about what does me moderating mean, how are you, how tired are you, you did Democracy Now! This morning, how are you feeling? We just got on stage and winged it, and it was default. And what happened was our default, the worst of it. Yeah. Last night, I picked you up at Newark, drove you to the Palestinian restaurant in Brooklyn, sat down, and we said, what's our intention for this weekend? And we decided that this was going to be a vibes-based weekend. It's about good vibes this time. That we don't have to worry so much about getting it right or the content or do we have all the material in order. we actually have been feeling good together since the book came out, even in spite of all those incidents. Like, all of those have kind of fallen into place. And maybe we can retire this, like, vaudeville act and maybe, it'll come up spontaneously and it's fun and whatever. And so I've been really enjoying and looking forward to and anticipating that event. Right. So then here I am in this moment, and I'm feeling basically relaxed, and I hear that sound.
Yep.
And I look over and I see your face on the screen, not listening to me.
But some of the time I was listening to you, I was just making notes.
I understand. No. But at that moment,
No.
Clearly you were not.
Yeah.
And I had an immediate nervous system reaction. I felt it. It came up my spine.
Yeah.
I got a jolt.
Yeah.
But I felt it.
Yeah.
I noticed it. I've never noticed it before.
Right.
Truly. In retrospect, I noticed it.
Yeah.
But my intention and my intolerance for a repetition of the same dumb syndicated subscription show that we've done a million times before, I'm unsubscribed.
Right.
I'm unsubscribed to that. And I'm just like, no, okay, maybe that's not necessary anymore. So it happened. I was like, did you send an email? You said, yes. You said, no. I said, did you send an email? You said, don't worry about it.
Is that what I said?
Yes.
Oh, didn't I say it's okay?
No, you said, don't worry about it.
Okay.
I think. Or maybe you said it's okay. But either way, what my interpretive mechanism says, he's saying it's not a big deal. Okay, there he goes gaslighting me. There's another overused word, but that's the perception. You're telling me that I'm crazy.
Yeah.
I noticed that thought. I'm like, well, that's not good vibes. That's just not compatible with good vibes. So what do I need to do to get back to the good vibes? Clearly, my nervous system is agitated, and so I asked you one more time, did you send an email? And you said, yes, but I had to. I said, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I stopped, I paused, I took a sip of water, I laughed, I waited until I was regulated, and then I continued. I did it for the vibes, man. But only because I had declared, and we had declared, we had agreed that we were going to make that more important than anything else this time, unlike other times.
Well, good on you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I want to just quickly offer a little something to see what you think of it, and then I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You're talking about how the problem with identifying with a role is that you never know when to take off the mask, and
Yeah.
you think it's you, and
Yeah.
you can't. And that parenting isn't a role; it's a relationship.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a closer synonym for role that would actually clarify the distinction. It seems to me that parenting is not a role; it's a function. Evolutionarily speaking,
Yeah.
parenting is there to accomplish a certain thing. And maybe this is a too dry way of talking about it, but in a sense, there's a time for parenting when you get to help a little creature along to maturity, and you do what you do, and you do your best. And then the function, that function expires, and there's something new to be created, because nature doesn't have a mandate or an agenda for what it's supposed to be like at this age, does it?
I'm not sure what distinction you're making here. Parenting has many functions, and they arise in response to the needs of the situation.
Right.
But ultimately, it's not a role that you assume. It's the relationship that you create with the child that allows you to fulfill those functions.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, that distinction just clarifies something that,
Okay.
I'm there to do something as best I can for the period of time
Yeah.
that it needs to be done.
Yeah.
My question for you has to do with something Carol said in her introduction.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, I'm glad she said it, because it gave me an opportunity to have a reaction. I bristled at it backstage. She mused, she wondered whether, just like part of mom's function or role to play in the story of your lives together is to bring your darkness to the light. She wondered if maybe part of why Daniel is here is to heal his father's trauma in some sense. Maybe I don't want to misconstrue what you said, Carol, but that's what it sounded like to me. And it's something I've thought about before. And personally, for me, I can't take that on. I cannot take that on as my reason for being here. In fact, part of me gets angry at it. That your trauma is not my responsibility. It has nothing to do with me. I didn't ask for it, okay? It's part of my fate to be born into the environment in which it was played out. And if you get some value out of our healing together, great, I would love that. But my role here, my purpose here is for me, for us, for the world, but it's not.
Okay, I hear you making.
I wanted to know what you think of that.
Oh, okay. Because I hear you making a statement. I was wondering what the question was.
Well, I had a strong reaction to it. The question is, what's your relationship to that?
Oh,
what do you think of it?
It's absolutely not your role to do anything for me that way.
Okay.
Absolutely not in the least.
Okay.
Which is not to say I haven't projected it on you.
Yeah, maybe that's why I have such a strong reaction.
Yeah. I remember there was a time when Daniel was 1 year old and he had a bit of diarrhea. He had a little intestinal virus. He was pooping a bit in his blanket, you know, on the kitchen floor. And I started crying. And my wife said, "What are you crying about?" And I said, "He's just a 1 year old kid with a bit of diarrhea, you know." Says my wife, "What I didn't know then is exactly, I only found out later through reading my mother's diary and talking with my mom, that exactly when I was that age, in the ghetto of Budapest, I had severe dysentery and diarrhea."
Well, that's why I did it, Dad.
Yeah.
Mom told me.
And so I was projecting my own unrecalled but body remembered trauma onto you. Mm-hmm. And I was seeing you on those tragic eyes,
yeah.
You know? And so for sure I projected my stuff onto you quite unwittingly, and certainly for reasons that had nothing to do with you personally. But no, it was never your role. And but you know, which is not to say that I never had that expectation. I kind of had the expectation. I remember having consciously thinking this when you were a kid, and I don't know exactly how old is that. He will heal, and sometimes, and somehow that's going to make the family okay. I did have that thought. So yeah, there's a fair bit of projection going on, I would say.
Heal, damn you!
But I also have to say that writing this book together that just came out, it did. You did kind of, how do you say? You fulfill a role.
I gave you something.
The fact that we did this together, and that you were so indispensable to the doing of it, so indispensable that, well, by definition, indispensable means couldn't be dispensed with. Had you not been there to do this book would not have happened. It would have been a very different product altogether, and not nearly as successful from my perspective, nor I think, from the public's perspective, as it has become. That has had a kind of sense of completion for me.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, that something that between us got completed, despite all the